So hello everyone, my name is Bobby Bukovec. I am a certified ERP consultant here at Embark for our NetSuite practice, and I'm here with John Warner, our NetSuite practice leader, and we're just going to be talking about best practices when it comes to implementations today.
Awesome. Thanks, Bobby. Super excited to talk today. I have been in ERP a long while, been working in the NetSuite space about 11 years. Here at Embark, I'm the service line leader. Super excited to jump into this. It's a topic that I think we can often go a little bit unchecked maybe, but diving into some of the, just like you were mentioning, right, best practices as it relates to preparing for an implementation, from the internal team all the way to the end of, once you're getting to the point of getting ready to go live, what are some of those things to be wary of, to look out for, ultimately to make sure you're successful?
Yeah, so you mentioned the team, right? The team around the implementation. So really, what should an organization's team look like for a successful NetSuite implementation?
Good question. I can't say I've seen it all, but I've seen a lot. Ultimately, with teams, there's really no right or wrong structure to the way that a team should look coming into an implementation. It's really more about, at least initially, your executive buy-in, making sure that your sponsors, whether that's a CFO, CEO, owner of a company, whomever that is really aligned. They are bought into the project and they understand kind of what they're getting into. I think starting with an executive leader is going to be the critical point, inflection point of, deciding, hey, we're going to jump off on this NetSuite journey.
Yeah.
And then from there, it's really going kind of down the line of who are your business process owners, who are those stakeholders that are going to be involved, who's going to run the project. Is that something that you're going to take on internally? Is that something that you're going to outsource to a service provider?
Right.
And then obviously taking into consideration your end users. But typically you're not going to have, no one team is going to look the exact same.
Yeah.
But it's just really making sure that you've got that executive alignment, that buy-in from the organization on the ERP journey.
Definitely. So, when it comes to those stakeholders that are going to be a part of the implementation, what really are the responsibilities around all of those different roles?
Good question. Again, when you talk about responsibilities, there's definitely a matrix that goes along with that. Your executive sponsors are really there for decision making. They're there to help align from a global business perspective, understanding at a high level, what do all these processes do? What do we need to get to at the end of the day? And then it's their job to delegate and to make sure that you have the business process owners involved who are going to be responsible for really leading those processes ultimately.
Right.
Those theoretically are going to be leaders of those processes. They're able to make decisions. They understand the functions that are needed. They understand the look and feel that they're needing from the NetSuite system at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And ultimately, them, along with the implementation team, are really going to be the heaviest involvement as far as that goes.
So when it comes to the communication really between all of those different stakeholders and all of their different responsibilities, what are some best practices around setting up that communication and those communication channels?
Really, in my experience, I've seen a lot. I've seen from implementations that do this really well, all the way to obviously the alternative to that, which is where communication is lacking. And really some of the critical pieces that I see as far as best practice is establishing those communication cadences and timelines, what those look like, who are the people who are engaged, setting that up early in the implementation, and then really marching and adhering to that sets implementations more so up for success.
Yeah, especially when you have roles or key individuals that are across different time zones.
Oh yeah, 100%. And you might have time zone issues. You're going to have multiple, different organizations involved. And guess what? In all likelihood, somebody's going to be inconvenienced. But that's where we were talking about earlier, that executive sponsorship and alignment is super critical, because if it's important to them, They'll make sure that it's important to the stakeholders.
Right.
You're going to make sure you're getting attendance at those meetings, because ultimately what you can find in implementations is you can get siloed. And that's what I was mentioning before with maybe bad communication. Still happens typically.
Yeah.
But if I'm only ever talking to one process owner, I'm only ever talking to somebody else in these silos, you may not get some of that kind of cross-functional discussions where something impacts, downstream or a different part of the organization that you weren't anticipating. And so having, stand-up meetings, having executive steer codes to make sure that the executive team is aligned with what's happening. And really, you can add or, any other really types of meetings that you want. You don't want it to be too heavy, but making sure that you're having those regular communications with the right people ensures that you never get, things can get off track, but it makes sure that you're able to get back in, mitigate those issues, and make sure that you've got the people who can make those decisions in the room.
Yeah, definitely. So when it comes to, a lot of those individuals that are working on a lot of the nitty-gritty details of the implementation, how do you make sure that those people are keeping your key decision makers informed? Like, what are some good strategies around that?
Yeah, a lot of that comes with really solid internal project management. Or like I mentioned earlier, if that's something where you just don't have the bandwidth, smaller company, or just, want to outsource that, something that 100% Embark does really, really well. But making sure that you have somebody not necessarily engaged from a process perspective or a really specific owner perspective, but making sure that you have somebody whose job is to help make sure the implementation goes well. That person is really kind of square in the headlights of making sure, your end users, your process users are communicating back and forth, as it relates to the overall health of the implementation.
Yeah, and to give feedback as well, right? To give feedback to all those individuals throughout the process is just important to help them grow throughout the implementation.
Yeah, and that comes, the more you can engage end users throughout the process, the more ownership, the more adoption, really all that good stuff that you want at the end of the day when you implement NetSuite, you're going to have that more. You're going to have those people more invested. And so at the end of the day, they're going to be able to use the system better. Right.
When it comes to, the PMO side of things, say you're a small company, you don't have the bandwidth to actually run the entire implementation. Do you recommend, partnering with another firm to get that kind of stuff done? Or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think, a solid, and, a lot of people think of PMO as it's a big organization, it's a big lift, something like that. But solid project management for a NetSuite implementation is going to pay off from front to back, really. And so if that's not something that you have bandwidth, or you have hey, this person can dedicate 50% of their time to managing the NetSuite project, absolutely. And really partnering with the right implementer of NetSuite.
Yeah.
A solid implementer is going to have somebody who can help you in that space, and ultimately has done NetSuite implementations many times over, knows, some of those follies and areas where you can, maybe lack, or areas that are pitfalls that people see. And a project management individual, let's call it, is somebody who can help you navigate that, whether you're small or whether it's a big implementation.
Yeah, extremely important to have someone that has been there, has done that before, and you are that guy. You've been through what, hundreds?
It's a lot. Over the years, it's definitely a sizable number. But I think with NetSuite, a lot of the implementation issues, a lot of things that you see, barring functionality, right? Everybody might do things a little bit differently, but from an implementation perspective, just like you said, having people or a partner in your corner who has been there before, understands a lot of the things, obviously about your business, but about just implementing a system, understands what that takes and how that can impact your team, is just such a benefit.
So, when talking about partnering with a firm like Embark or with another implementation firm, What are some key criteria or factors that the organization should really consider when trying to choose that organization to help partner with?
Yeah, I think for me, when I look back at implementations that I've supported, a lot of different personalities.
Yeah.
Every different, well, I'll say this, every different implementation I've done, never met a CFO who's the same, never met ownership who's the same, all the way down to your plant techs, your people, who are doing the day-to-day work. Everybody's a little bit different.
Yeah.
And so for me, when I look at how can a company, select the right implementation team, the right partner, it's really who can you work with, right? Making sure that you align from a culture perspective, making sure that I can look across the table at the guy helping me implement my system, and we know we can work together really well. Implementations are not smooth all the time. And so making sure that you can work with somebody, even when it's tough, is going to be a huge component. Now, is it the biggest thing? The way that I look at it, probably yes. But you're not going to get there without checking some boxes. They've
Right.
got to be experts.
Right.
They've got to know your industry. They've got to have done, implementations in the past, right? So there's some definite table stakes components to picking the right implementer. But the way that I look at it is just given the variety and kind of that journey of an implementation, being able to work with somebody you like, being able to work with a team that is going to be in the trenches with you.
Definitely.
To me, that's pretty invaluable.
Yeah. So, you were just talking about the factors that a organization should look at when choosing a NetSuite implementation firm. So how does Embark really stand out there? Like, why choose Embark over some other companies out there?
Yeah, I've worked at a few. I can say that. I've definitely implemented NetSuite at a few different firms, a lot of different styles, a lot of different ways in which projects get approached, projects are run, people are staffed, so many different varieties when you start to now think of internally how implementers support implementation.
Yeah.
How Embark stands out to me is really, yes, again, we talk about table stakes. We do all of those things. We have the expertise from an industry perspective. Embark does a phenomenal job from, leading projects, that project management component, knowing your business, knowing how NetSuite operates, really those components of an implementation that are critical to getting NetSuite up and live. Table stakes is what I call it.
Yeah.
The component that really turns Embark into a true business partner when you're thinking about NetSuite implementation is all of the other stuff, right? We care a lot about our people. We care a ton about our clients. And we're experts in a lot of areas outside of NetSuite, from accounting to business transformation to, we can help with transactions. We help with growth. We help with, reporting, so many different things where
Right.
you might look for, hey, who can help me with a NetSuite implementation? And you can go and find that. But when that very first question pops up, hey, how does this implicate our reporting? Our private equity firm's got some questions about how this is going to work. We have a transaction impending. Like, how does this impact? Having a firm that can answer all of those is just going to provide you so much efficiency. You're not bringing anybody else in. You really can come to Embark and get all of that done, as well as a obvious, phenomenal NetSuite implementation.
Definitely. Yeah, we have the resources from the NetSuite side, but we also have the resources from the technical accounting side. So
yeah, it's truly a one-stop shop.
Definitely. So, when actually talking more just about Embark here, how do we go about performing an implementation, a NetSuite implementation?
Yeah, it's something that I've really tried to hone in over my career. Obviously, early days with NetSuite, very different than necessarily how I approach it now. The way in which I think Embark stands apart from an implementation perspective when we're talking about NetSuite is a lot of implementers and a lot of time it's pretty structured from the perspective of, hey, we'll do X, you do Y.
Yeah.
When it comes to how Embark implements NetSuite, we'll do what you need to be successful. I think
Exactly.
at a really high level. If that means we support more of your data migration effort, right? We can pull it from your system, cleanse it, import it. You don't worry about it, right? It's something that's unique to us and something that from an overarching success of a NetSuite implementation, that goes a long way. I think the other piece of it is it goes a long way from a client side perspective. They don't worry about it. There's enough stress that goes on during an implementation that we can take on more of that.
Right.
And so it's not just data, right? If you need us to truly come in and manage the project from end to end, we'll do that too. We'll step in and support really in any places that are needed during the project, rather than, being really myopic with, hey, we do NetSuite, you do you, right? We'll help. We'll be there for you. And so I think from just a structure of an implementation, we have that ability to be a little bit more flexible in how we support and in the effective abilities that we have to support you from not only that, but from the business as well.
Right. So for the structure of an implementation, how important is it really to break that implementation down into different phases?
Huge. I think when you look at a successful implementation, and it's something that NetSuite has actually really gone more and more towards with their effort, several years back to go to the Suite Success methodology, which is really pretty prescriptive. And here is the best practices in different industries and setting up the product in a way that becomes, I'm sure it's cliche, but a little more out of the box, to where if you're in a specific industry, NetSuite has a product that's pretty well configured for you, and then you're just personalizing, right? You're just making those little tweaks and changes along the way without having to do a full custom configuration every time.
Yeah.
So we 100% prescribe to that as well. We also try to be very prescriptive with people that even though you can go with what I used to call the big bang approach, where it's like, hey, your business does this, we're going to implement you for 2 years and bring all of that, right? It can be done, but you're going to get some fatigue.
Right.
It takes a long time, huge amount of resources from your team, both from a cost, from a people, all of that perspective.
Oh, yeah.
And so phasing is something, it's not new necessarily, but being able to phase an implementation and stand up the components of it that are needed now, most needed, whatever you want to call it, but identifying with, and this is something that Embark does, but identifying with a client, help us understand what you need to get online first, and then taking that, scoping it, making sure that you stay tight with what the bounds around that, getting live, and then ultimately moving on, right? So you can continue to grow on the system. We can continue to support you through that journey. But ultimately what it allows you to do is get proficient, get comfortable, get into the system without having, hey, I implemented and from a business process owner, I did my piece 6 months ago. Likely I've forgotten how to use it now.
Right, definitely.
Right, so it keeps it tight and really keeps your people engaged and gets them moving.
Yeah, the user proficiency is, a huge deal there, right? Like trying to start someone that is learning a small module of NetSuite, base NetSuite, is very easy, right? We can teach them how to use that. However, having someone start with 10 different modules in NetSuite, having them do all of their different business processes all in NetSuite right from day one, that'd be a lot more to learn, and just probably going to result in less user enjoyment around the system.
And it's challenging. And that's why I say ultimately, we don't come in and say you can only do X, Y, Z, but it's really just helping them identify what's needed now.
Right.
What are the things, the biggest pain points that we can automate that you really need to be in NetSuite day one? Yeah. And then let's go. Let's march towards that.
Yeah. So anticipating real-world challenges such as data migration complexities, user resistance to change, and integration issues is, crucial for a successful NetSuite implementation. So can you share some strategies or best practices for overcoming those challenges, particularly in the context of, the methodology that was described in the blog post?
Yeah. So, really what I see a lot. We see it now. I've seen it kind of from a high level throughout my career, is mitigating a lot of that really depends on kind of solid communication, solid testing. There's so much that goes into an implementation just from a pure user perspective. They're expected to do a whole lot. So ultimately, when you see some of those issues from a migration, integration, all of those things that can ultimately cause slowdowns, stoppage, whatever that might be, making sure that you're continuing from start to finish, engaging the right people and making sure that there's a continuity of that is going to help you when anything comes up. You know, again, I talked about it earlier, but having the right people in the room to make those decisions. The hope is that it becomes small iterations, right? You're not getting a couple months down the road, 6 weeks down the road, and then ultimately, hey, we forgot to do this 3 weeks ago, and now it's going to cause a delay. So having consistency, continuity from a personnel and from a communication perspective is really going to help as far as, you know, what we've seen be successful there.
So how can organizations leverage the expertise of implementation partners for navigating those challenges effectively?
It's new for them, right? I mean, if you implementing a new ERP system is something that, you know, in today's market, maybe you'll have folks who've done it. Hey, I did this, you know, back in my old company, or had it done to me, right? I was on something, then forced to change, whatever that, you know, kind of discussion is. But that's their frame of reference. Really having a solid partner to help you with implementation who understands what those stresses look like, understands what the decision making needs to be, how people need to kind of move in and out of an implementation is going to be critical, and ultimately not a skill set that's expected to sit on the client side. So having the right partner is really going to pay off as far as just an overarching implementation, because the expertise, you're able to still do your job. You're able to be guided, led as far as, hey, you know, we get that businesses do things differently, but there's also best practices. There's also ways to best use the system, and we can help you with that, right? And we can help you navigate what that looks like.
So let's talk a little bit more about just executive buy-in, you know, how to get your executives actually wanting to purchase NetSuite, right? So, you know, how can an organization actually communicate some strategic reasons to implement NetSuite? What are those?
Having spent quite a bit of time actually on the selling side of NetSuite, I've seen a lot of different things. I would say as a typical, you know, a lot of times when you're seeing people reaching out about NetSuite, you know, people considering purchasing an ERP, purchasing NetSuite, unfortunately, a lot of times that's driven from pain, right? We're experiencing X or Y. We need something else. So not to say that necessarily that's a main like way to, you know, attain buy-in, but it's really easy. Right. And so that I would call kind of one layer, right? Pain points, areas that are not being able to, you know, be done quickly. I think some other high level ones, NetSuite is a single platform where you can do the bulk of your business. You can manage a lot of your business processes in one place. I can't tell you how many times I have seen companies who come to me and say, hey, like, we're running XYZ for our ERP. We're paying this. It works great. Cool. You meet with, you know, you move forward. Awesome. You meet with their supply chain, their purchasing. You know, you start to meet with more people like, oh, well, we have this system, that system. And you start to see that a single platform where you can have everything is really meaningful. Right? And a lot of times it takes having those second and third conversations with your executive leader who doesn't understand that. They don't know that these other parts of the business have gone and bought different, you know, softwares to run their organizations. And so, you know, a singular platform is a huge component of attaining that buy-in.
Yeah.
I think another one, and this obviously depends a lot on, the engagement of your leaders, but lack of reporting, visibility into the business is humongous. Honestly, that's probably the single biggest one, because a CEO, owner, private equity group, whomever it is, at the end of the day, they need to know how the business is doing.
Yeah.
And so many systems out there, whether they're legacy or even some newer ones, it's like, great, like CEO comes to me, I need this. Okay, give me a week so I can compile all the data, upload it, and then ultimately you have to look at that data knowing you're missing a week of data, right? So
yeah,
it's
exactly.
so often visibility, real-time access to your data is just non-existent. And something with NetSuite, again, it builds on the singular platform, right? Having everything in your business running on one system that runs in real time allows you that insight into the business that, one, it's super critical, but your competitors probably don't have that, right? So it gives you that step above what your competition is probably doing.
Right. And I think you can really apply that to companies that are currently running NetSuite as well. There are so many cases that I come across in my, day-to-day life where the company has no idea that NetSuite can do X, Y, Z, so they have other add-ons that they try to connect to NetSuite rather than just doing it all inside the system, right?
Yeah.
So,
and I think, that speaks to, just like you were saying, right? You can look at NetSuite environments kind of comparatively across and having, maybe this goes back a little bit, but having that partner, that consultant who works with you, on a regular basis to help you be apprised of, hey, this is coming, that's coming. NetSuite changes, I would say officially twice a year, right? But the way in which NetSuite changes, there are so many benefits, so many things that can help your business become better, help you operate more efficiently. And I think coming roundabout to your original question, right? There are softwares out there outside of NetSuite that don't really upgrade, right? So I think as a pitch to an executive might be, hey, this system is not stagnant. We're not buying a version. We're buying NetSuite, and we're always going to be on the latest version of NetSuite. We're always getting the best possible, bang for our buck with this software.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it'll be with you for, however long your organization will continue to work with it, really. You know, it'll grow with you.
Yep.
So, just getting a little bit more granular into that executive buy-in. What are some some quantitative ways to help build that business case?
Ultimately, when you talk quantitative, there's definitely some components that'll be business specific, but some things that people often look at is, hey, it's taking us 20, 10, whatever that is, days to close.
Right.
What if we could do that in 3? Right? Starting to look at some of those metrics where, how do I shrink times like that? Hey, because I have no visibility, we don't know what our days sales outstanding or our DSOs, we don't know what that looks like, right? What if I could take that from 30 to 10 or 20? Right? That then allows you, like, those are, they're quantitative metrics, but they're very easily, when you look at cash flows, I can start to see, if I got this much cash this much earlier, what does that look like?
Right.
And these aren't one-time things, right? These are metrics that you can look at that are really quantitative in nature, that you're going to be recognizing benefit from month over month over month.
Yeah.
And so when you look at it from a long-term perspective, those are pretty powerful things to see.
Yeah, and definitely when your company is doing a lot of just manual processes inside Excel, right? Those a lot of times are just, key identifiers to show us that, hey, like, we could probably automate that with NetSuite. We can bring that process all internal to NetSuite and save you, a day or so, however long it takes for you to do that process manually. We can do that in NetSuite for, maybe 10 minutes or so, maybe less. You never know.
Yeah, and it's those types of, seemingly qualitative things that you talk about up front, where it's, what if I could save your accounting department 3 days?
Right.
Right. One, there's all the reporting, the qualitative, right? I get that faster. But what if I'm not paying, 5 people 3 extra days to do that same work?
Yeah.
Right. So you're starting to shrink some of that. Now, none of that is to say you shrink your accounting team. What that is saying is those people can be spending time in more value-added activities.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So when thinking about an implementation, still on that executive buy-in train here, how do you address concerns, cost concerns, disruption concerns, stuff like that? How do you address that when thinking about the implementation at the beginning?
Yeah, it really, from an experience perspective in talking to leaders, talking to people who have some of those concerns at the outset, a lot of it becomes really helping them understand their current state better.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about that, but it's very rare that your executive leadership, and maybe this seems crazy, maybe not, but it's very rare from an executive leadership perspective that they truly understand the full scope of what they have today from a tech stack perspective. And along with that goes, if they don't know what all they're using, they definitely don't know what all they're paying.
Yeah.
And so when you think about cost concerns, purely from that perspective, it's a lot of times really eye-opening. And I've been in the rooms a lot of time when you have an owner kind of with their team start to look at, wait, I thought we just used this. We use 10 systems and it cost me this much money. Like I've seen that eye open, right? As far as, oh my gosh. And forget, they're moving, they want to move, whatever, but it's just helping them really understand what does it look like from a cost side. And not only that, but if I'm using 10 different tools to run my business, think about all of the manual steps that are being taken to either integrate, load data, transform data here, there, whatever. So in my opinion, and kind of what I've seen, when you look at cost or overhead, type of things, resource constraints, a lot of times having some of those initial conversations of, well, let's talk a little bit more about what it looks like today. You're able to open up to, oh my gosh, like it really is, it's not as easy as I thought. It's not as cheap as I thought.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that they're signing on the line that day, right? But it just means they're more open to a conversation about how can you make their life better?
Definitely.
How can you make their people more efficient?
Right. Okay, so now we're just going to get into, the question that everyone asks whenever we're talking about an implementation. How long does it take for NetSuite?
It is a great question. As is with any tool, with any NetSuite implementation I've ever been on, the short answer, it depends.
Always.
What does the phase look like? How much functionality are you looking to bring online initially? How big is the team? What is your timeline? So many different factors really come into play when you're talking about how long will it take. Ideally, when you're getting that question from an executive, from a leader, from somebody, you will have had enough discussions to maybe have an inkling of what their timeline is, maybe, who can be involved and how much time they can give.
Right.
What your team, right? If you're a partner, you're going to be the implementer. What does your team look like? So really with every kind of discussion you have, you can start to isolate what that looks like. Now, having said all that, a simple implementation of NetSuite, probably around 3 to 6 months. I'll leave it there. A simple implementation.
Right.
I have worked on a lot of implementations that are a year plus, that are, all the way probably up to a couple of years. Now, it's been a while since I've been on those 2+ year projects, and a lot of that has to do with the way that NetSuite sells. We talked about Suite Success earlier. That has cut down a lot as far as just the methodology and the way that you implement it,
right,
to where those durations are a little bit shorter. But I would say, again, simple 3 to 6, larger, bigger, you could be looking at a year plus.
Gotcha.
From end to end.
And so, what is the difference between a simple implementation and a complex implementation? What are some of those key factors that really would influence that timeline?
Yeah. Dedicated teams, people who have a very good understanding and well-documented business processes,
Fair.
people who have a really tight scope initially, I would say. And that doesn't mean that it's like, hey, you give me my chart of accounts and that's it. It could be more, right? But ultimately, making sure that you are well aligned with the executive team, your business process owners have the time available to spend, and you have the bandwidth internally, that really, to me, is kind of a good starting spot for a simple implementation and for something where you can get it done quicker.
Yeah. And so what about like customization asks? How does that affect the implementation timeline?
I'll give you two. I'll give you two here. Not specific, but two things, when you talk about timeline, when you talk about keeping it simple, implementations done quickly, the two biggest things that I think can throw that off is a lack of attention to data migration and the data that you need in the system, which we can talk about later, and then customizations like you mentioned. NetSuite really can do so much out of the box. There's so much capability that it can handle natively, let's call it, without real customization. But it just becomes about a business's openness to operating, in a way that might be a little different. Doesn't mean that it's worse. It's probably a lot more efficient. But utilizing NetSuite in its, kind of with native functionality is 100%, one, a best practice anywhere you can. But when you go the other way, when we talk timelines, customizations, things like that tend to buck that trend of a shorter timeline.
Yeah, definitely always a good idea to start small, and build from there.
Yep.
So start with the native NetSuite, maybe add some customization features in a later phase, that kind of a thing.
Absolutely.
Really throughout the implementation process, can you explain some best practices when it comes to communication around unexpected issues that come up throughout the process?
Yeah, it happens. It happens.
Always does.
An ERP implementation, and I wouldn't even say specifically NetSuite, but as it relates to NetSuite, but could really be any implementation. There's going to be stuff that changes. There's going to be issues that come up. I think communication, harking back a little bit earlier, but establishing regular communication, making sure that you have that, regular cadence is going to help. Now, there's a million different tools that can be utilized, right, as far as issue tracking, as far as, documenting and keeping track of any things that you're seeing. But I think, my opinion with an implementation, there's so much writing on it. There's so much that goes into, getting it right and making sure that people are, that all the wheels are turning. It's never too early to loop in, your executive team or your executive sponsor. I'll say that.
Right.
Because ultimately from a decision making, from an awareness, all that good stuff, it really helps to have that sponsor really close.
Definitely.
And so as a part of that, making sure that, as issues arise, whether it's, somebody as an end user, it's a process owner, whomever that might be, making sure that communication starts quickly, making sure that people are kind of informed and decisions can be made, adjustments can be made, whatever that might be.
Right.
Again, keeps you on track, keeps you moving forward.
So getting into data migration, right?
Sure.
Data migration can be seen as a very lengthy process, just a very time-intensive process in general, right? And there's a lot that could go wrong there. So really, when it comes to data migration, how important is that planning process?
Yeah. And it's funny. I would say, relative to kind of how you framed it, lengthy, time-consuming, those are all realities of data migration. And quite frankly, the customers or people who are implementing NetSuite who know that up front it goes better.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, which might seem crazy, but my experience has always been people who implement NetSuite who think, oh, this data migration is going to be easy. We're really simple, not a lot there, and kind of push it off, right? We'll deal with that a little bit later. Those are the ones that make me nervous, not the ones who come to me and say, we have so much data, we really need your help. This is a lot of work here. They fully respect how much that impacts their system.
Yeah.
And so almost always those go better. So, from an overarching, like when I look at NetSuite implementations, the single greatest point of failure is data migration. Failure might be too strong. It gets done, but when you talk about cost, time, all of those things that are scary things in an implementation, data migration is almost always the one that can push and cause those things to be delayed. There's nothing worse than having trained end users, a system that looks great, works great in a training, testing environment, but you can't go live because the data's not there.
Right.
Or you can't go live because it's inaccurate. You can't get it out of the system. And ultimately, that probably was the case before you even started the implementation.
Yep.
So identifying what does the data need to look like, both from a master, right, customers, items, vendors, as well as a financial data perspective. How much do we need? Trial balances? Do we want transaction level data?
Right.
There's a lot of pieces to it, but as you're starting to think, hey, we might want a new system, or we might be coming off of just, manual processes and thinking about going to NetSuite.
Yeah.
The second you think in your head, hey, like NetSuite might be in our future, start thinking about that. It's never too early to start thinking about data.
Definitely. And so, throughout that data migration process, you're likely going to come across several data inconsistencies, especially if your previous systems, were spread across multiple different systems. So what is the best way to really handle those data inconsistencies when bringing that into NetSuite?
Yeah, a couple different thoughts there. Depending on how large of an organization you are, or, the other side, right? If you're relatively small, there's a couple approaches. If you're pretty small, you may not have bandwidth in-house. You may not have people looking at that. By that same token, if you're too big, you might not have enough people to look at it. So I think when you're talking about inconsistencies or trying to marry data from different systems, a lot of times it's very, very helpful to engage with your partner, engage with your implementation team, and start to have those discussions, right? I think at a minimum, most companies are going to know, this is the type of data. These are the things that we need.
Right.
Here's where it is. That might be where it stops. And then it's, can you please help us get it, right? We don't know how to get it out. We don't know what it needs to look like to get into NetSuite. And that's something that here at Embark, we've done countless number of times.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I think a partner can help. And quite frankly, I think a big part from a customer perspective, if you start to get into that headspace as you're starting an implementation where you're like, I'm not sure X, I'm not sure Y, I don't know how to do this, it's never too early to pull that ripcord, right?
Yeah.
Bring in your partner, have them help you, and really see what what they can do to help you along that way, because it can compound.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, from an Embark perspective, that is something that we support day in and day out, whether it's NetSuite, whether it's a common system or not. You can never engage too early to have some help there.
Right. Awesome. So in a lot of company cases, right, you have a lot of clients that want to customize NetSuite to be exactly like their previous processes. So, what are some reasons organizations should attempt to use native NetSuite over those customizations, at least at the beginning?
Yeah, I think that in my experience, what I'd seen, call it, many years ago when I started implementing NetSuite, it was far more focused around, hey, you come to me, you tell me what you want, and we'll build it. very much kind of the norm from a NetSuite implementation perspective. We've talked about it. The move to Suite Success, I think, helped. What that really meant was NetSuite took thousands and thousands of customers worth of configurations, really took a step back and understood, if I look at any given industry across the board and say, what are some of those commonalities? How can we just build that into the product, right? Build that into the configuration that customers get day one. So in doing a lot of that, what they came up with were very specific, industry specific solutions that a customer could say, hey, instead of taking a blank slate and let's customize the crap out of it, which a lot of people did, take a solution that's maybe 70, 80% of the way there, make some tweaks, and ultimately get to that same endpoint. So really the intent of Suite Success was to take a lot of the need for that heavy customization out of it.
Right.
And so you kind of had that original or I guess early stage implementation, which was, again, super long, really customized, very expensive, both from a client perspective and what they're paying perspective.
Right.
To now where hopefully you have something that's tighter, you're able to utilize more of what's out of the box.
Right.
Versus that customization heavy. Now, none of that is to say that you won't have customers who come to you and say, hey, I need to use this process that I have exactly the way that it is. As, consultants like Bobby and myself, we've been around the block. We've seen that, heard those comments many, many times. And ultimately, a lot of what a good partner, a good consultant's job is to help you understand, okay, we get your process. We understand how you're doing it today, and help them understand how NetSuite operates. And sometimes there's a delta, and there might be a small customization, or sometimes they're like, oh, we get that. We understand that most companies like us are doing it a different way. We can do it that way. We can stay with native functionality versus larger customizations.
Right.
You alluded to the point earlier of, why is that important, at least initially? Customization and further automation within NetSuite is something that is more or less infinite. There's so many different ways. It's such a flexible platform. You can use it to do really anything within the business.
Yeah.
But using native functionality, when you're making that change of systems, you're jumping onto NetSuite initially, using it out of the box, getting comfortable, getting really good at using it initially allows you the ability, I think, further on to add some of those customizations, understand what they're doing, understand
take
some
advantage
of
of them.
Right. Understand the whys, right?
Yeah.
Like, why would I do a customization versus, coming in more like bull in a china shop of, I want all of this the way that it was done before.
Right.
There's a reason you want to come to NetSuite. There's a reason you want to use it for its, best practices. Ultimately, it's a lot of times just having some of those conversations of, we don't want to recreate some of these processes that maybe you're trying to get away from, right? And NetSuite fills that gap of, again, understanding what a lot of these industries, customers, people need, and building the software for that.
Yeah, and there's a big difference between customization and configuration in NetSuite, right? Like, yes, NetSuite is a platform that can be extremely customized, but it also is a platform that can be extremely configured by the end user in the system too, right? So what is the difference really between customization and configuration? And really does configuration changes add a lot of time to an implementation?
Not at all. And that's actually a really good point to bring up. When we talk about customization versus configuration, it's funny. It's a term across different ERPs, across different softwares that can mean very different things. When we talk about configuration in NetSuite, it is, hey, this field on a form, I don't like it there. I want to move it over one. That's configuration.
Right.
It is named X. I want it to be named Y.
Right.
right? There's very simple things that are configurable in NetSuite.
The look of reports.
Right. How things look,
Right.
how to get data out
Right.
of the system. Like you might have a configured report. Very, very easy. Not a lot of cost, not a lot of time.
Definitely.
Doesn't affect timelines.
Yep.
Configuration as a general can do a lot. And I think that's really the point to make is you can get a really long way in NetSuite with just configuration changes before you get into customization.
Exactly.
Which customization is you're building complex workflows. You might be using back-end scripting and coding functionality to really manipulate the way that NetSuite works.
Right.
And that's not a bad thing necessarily, but if you want to think of how can I make sure that we're staying simple, we are not, expanding costs, expanding timelines, there's a lot that can be done with NetSuite when you're just configuring.
And really, when introducing a lot of those more complex customization efforts, you just want to make sure that people in-house to your organization know how to maintain that customization, right? Because I've worked with many clients where they have absolutely no idea what that customization is doing in the software, how they can fix it if anything goes wrong. It can be a big mess.
Yeah. And that's, 100% right. If you want to, it's very easy to maintain and manage NetSuite long-term when it's configured and mostly native.
Right.
Once you start to add and layer in some of these customizations, just like you're mentioning, like you better have somebody who knows how that works, can manage it, and ultimately can kind of continue to maintain that customization.
Right. Or, at least good user documentation on how to work with all of that, a lot through the testing. Actually, let's get over to that. So when it comes to testing throughout the implementation, what are those tests that need to be done? Yeah. And when are they done?
And I would say from a testing perspective, really as you build NetSuite, as you configure, get your processes, your people into the system, you're kind of always testing to a degree. As you build, as you configure, as you, look at different transactions, different processes in the system, you're always kind of doing bits and pieces of testing.
Right.
I want to see how this works. I want to see how that works. When we talk about more formalized testing, at least that we adhere to here at Embark, really critical, imperative to an implementation, we focus really heavily on user acceptance testing, which is, hey, these are our business process owners that we've been working with throughout the process. We've configured the system. It's ready to go. It meets the needs of what the business process was.
Yep.
User acceptance testing is where we have documented all of our test scripts. We've documented all of our test cases. Everything really that those different departments need to do to function within the business gets documented. And user acceptance testing literally will walk through step by step to make sure, hey, the system is functioning and operates as we need it to.
Yeah.
That's user acceptance testing.
Yeah, for sure.
Not to say that it's, that's not to minimize it, but it's documented. We understand everything we went through, any defects, anything that didn't work, all of that becomes documented so that you can go back, right? You can always look back and see, well, how's this process supposed to work? How am I supposed to be able to, get through these different business functions? You've got really that playbook.
Yeah.
And ultimately along the way, you're able to solve or mitigate or, get through any of those issues you come into. And what that comes, ultimately what you end up with are test cases that then go to what's called end user testing or EUT, however you want to phrase that. End user testing is where your business process owner is really sitting at the helm and they're supporting all of those different end users to do their jobs.
Yeah.
So that's getting all of your user base into the system. And these are people who likely have not been engaged in the implementation as much. Maybe they have. Mm-hmm. But these are folks who they might be logging in for the first time. They haven't been involved in the design, in the day-to-day. They just need to do their job.
Right.
And so end user testing is really handing them a playbook of here are those tasks, here are those things that you need to do, and here's how you get it done.
Right.
So they have that documented, I go here, I click here, I do this, I do that. so that at the end of the day, all of your end users know I can log in NetSuite, I can get done what I need to do. And even through that end user testing, there could be iterations of, oh, well, this little tweak, this little change. So testing is critical, one. Two, it really is something that happens throughout the implementation.
And after.
But those pieces of it at the end are really where kind of the rubber hits the road as far as making sure that people can do their job, making sure that when NetSuite is live, you're able to operate.
Yeah. Are there any specific strategies or techniques that you recommend for efficiently identifying and addressing potential issues during the testing phase?
I've seen some bad practice here. I've also seen some really good practice. And I'll say Embark's very good at the latter. But some practices that I've seen that really kind of derail or make your testing process bad is kind of if you have not enough documentation. And to clarify that, if you are in the system, I'm testing around, I see a problem, and I go and make that change and kind of move forward. Not documenting all of those areas where changes are made is really hard to backtrack that. And so I think, something that Embark does really well, something that we strive to do is through user testing, when we're looking at test cases, scenarios, try and be as descriptive and as kind of step-by-step as you possibly can, so that each individual point ultimately has, hey, we tested this, it worked, it didn't work, whatever. Mm-hmm. But the more expanded you can be on those individual test cases or test scripts, the tighter those can be, and the better able you are to mitigate things. If you skip forward, if things are too vague, you might miss it. Right. So just from a pure testing perspective, it's good practice to do that. And what that ultimately, I think, ends up in is a more documented and well-detailed, call it desk manual for your end users. Yeah. So they know very easily how to get things done.
Yeah, very fair. Can you share an example of how effective communication, really just led to a successful implementation?
Oh, 100%. And I think I've worked in implementations where you kind of have your configuration, your partner team goes away, they do their stuff. Meanwhile, client is still operating, still working in their system, they're doing their stuff. And ultimately, communication happens, hey, we're configured, we're done with this section. Mm-hmm. Okay, great, we'll go look at it. When you have kind of that sporadic or really intermittent communication, whether it's through the implementation, through the testing phase, wherever it is, that type of intermittency can cause really big delays if there are issues.
Yeah.
Really a well-communicated and a highly communicative environment from a client and partner perspective is going to lead to a on-time, on-budget, and efficient implementation. The alternative compounds. Hey, we ran into a problem. We'll let these guys know when we're done with the rest of it. Okay, great. They'll go back, test it. Yeah, well, let's get through the rest of testing before we say anything.
Yeah.
And now you have problems that continue to expand, and you have, maybe you don't have additional, scope or cost necessarily, but time, right? You have a big issue at the end of that, because ultimately these little delays back and forth end up, you blow past go live, or, that kind of stuff can happen really easily when you're not effectively communicating back and forth.
When it comes to post-implementation testing, how do you maintain system performance, and how do you really test to maintain that system performance with the environment over time?
Post-go-live testing, and it's interesting, within NetSuite, there's this concept of a sandbox. I think most softwares out there have a development environment or what have you. Utilizing your sandbox really well when you are live in NetSuite is critical. So I want to make a change. I see something in my day-to-day that isn't as efficient as it could be. Ultimately, once you implement NetSuite, it does not mean, hey, this is it. Here's our box. We got to operate in it forever. It is iterative. NetSuite in and of itself is iterative, right? It has releases every year twice a year to continue to get better. And so continuing to test, maybe it's new functionality, continuing to test, hey, we think we can improve our process by doing this, right? Or somebody's noticing this takes them a little bit longer. Any sort of efficiency, optimization, there's a lot of different things once you're live that you can continue to try, test it. Obviously, make sure you're in that sandbox environment, but that's where you can continue to improve your NetSuite environment over time. Now, working with a partner or if you have an awesome administrator in-house, that's where you need to have a process, right? If I'm going to test, hey, I think this process will be better if we do it this way, making sure that you have a plan, a process for moving things into your live environment is going to be very important. But just because you're live doesn't mean that you can't continue to improve and continue to expand your use or become more efficient.
Right, definitely. And, that's one of the reasons that NetSuite rolls out those updates twice a year, right? And you can use release preview accounts inside of NetSuite to continue doing new testing with new features that are coming out in NetSuite. You can continue becoming more efficient using those new features, everything like that. So.
Yeah, 100%.
So can you elaborate a little bit more on the role of rigorous user testing in just ensuring successful NetSuite adoption?
Oh, it's a direct correlation, in my opinion. I have worked I can think of so many specific examples of implementations that were bigger, heavy, or however you want to look at it, right? Maybe it was a big implementation. Maybe it was a super simple implementation. You get to the end of it, and the client's like, hey, it's good, looks great. Like, let's go live, let's operate, we're good to go. Almost immediately, you have problems. The time and the place to address, mitigate, resolve problems is not post-go live, right? It happens. None of that is to say that it doesn't happen. You might have issues here and there. But a properly tested system, one, is going to really reduce the number of issues you have. And two, and I think this is the biggest, it gets your people into the system.
Yep.
It increases ownership. It increases the likelihood that afterwards, that person is going to continue using it. Right. They were involved. They feel comfortable, acceptance. Right?
Definitely.
They were, it's documented. They feel like they can actually use this new tool to do their job and to be efficient.
Yeah.
I've seen so many times where it's like, hey, we got into the system, we tested maybe a little bit, we feel like, yeah, this will probably work, but then that same user doesn't do their job. They start doing things manually.
Right.
They start speaking up, hey, we should keep the old system around just to have it. A properly tested system, it is a direct correlation to testing and user adoption. And ultimately, an unadopted NetSuite is not useful.
Right.
And so I think anything, if nothing else, as a pure takeaway, making sure that you have people who are fully adopted in NetSuite, understand how to do their job, and really enjoy it. NetSuite is a tool that Bobby and I are here because we love it. We love using it. and seeing our clients be successful, seeing them innovate, seeing them come up with different ways to be efficient is incredible. And people don't do that if they haven't adopted it.
Always brings a smile to my face when I can give a client back their weekends, right? Let them go to their kids' baseball games.
It's huge. It's huge. And so I would agree. I think, testing, adoption, ultimately that's why I do it, right? I think getting people to see and feel the vision of how NetSuite can help them in their lives, can help make them more successful at what they do, and be more efficient with their time is it's big. It's awesome.
So in your opinion, can you ever do too much testing? When is the right time to stop testing and implement already, right? To go live?
Yeah. I think you can get into kind of, the analysis paralysis, right? Like, what
Definitely.
about this? All of these different things. I think tying in, when I've seen that happen is when you're at the end of the implementation, business process owners feel pretty comfortable. They feel like they've got it down, feel like it's designed pretty well. But then ultimately go live's coming and it's, hey, like, now I'm on the line a little bit, right? It's got to be right because I own this. This is my process. And so I think there's definitely an equilibrium point where getting your process owners to that point where they feel like the process works, I'm confident, it looks right, feels right, it's tested, we've gone through our testing, and then ultimately when needs be, like, hey, let's come to that steering committee meeting, let's talk to your executive sponsors, let's make sure we understand, here's where we're at from a timing perspective, people feel pretty comfortable, we've done X amount of testing, and then ultimately having that executive sponsor buy off on, hey, we think we're ready to go, it helps.
So how important is it for organizations to consider industry-specific regulations, compliance requirements, and data demands during their NetSuite implementation process?
Critical. You've got to have it, right? If
Definitely.
you've got industry, for example, if you're in, healthcare, if you're in manufacturing, all of these different industries, while they do have specific iterations and additions of NetSuite that help with a lot of those things, understanding what those different regulations or requirements, guidelines, reporting, any of that type of recommendation or requirements that you have are going to be critical when it comes to preparing really for an ERP implementation.
So when it comes to partnering with an implementation firm for NetSuite, how important is it that you partner with one that knows your industry?
I mean, depends on if you want to be successful. So I think having people with, the NetSuite expertise who understand your industry, understand the needs of your business to be successful in NetSuite, right? Yeah. Table stakes, like we talked about before. But the beauty and where you would really be more successful and gain a lot of those efficiencies is when you partner with a firm who has the technical advice, that has the guidance, the support systems in place, and really understands those from a really fundamental perspective. Yeah. So can't emphasize how critical it is, to make sure that you're partnering with the right people who understand you.
Yeah, definitely. So that's all we have for you today. Thank you, John, for sitting with us. Feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn with any questions that you have. My name is Bobby Bukovec.
John Warner.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it.